At the tender age of 14, my world didn't just crack, it shattered. First, the deafening silence left by my father, stolen by a horrific car accident. Just a few agonizing months later, the long, grueling fight my mother waged against cancer finally claimed her. In what felt like a single, cruel breath, I was utterly and completely alone. The state, deciding I was too young and too lost to navigate life on my own, put me into foster care. My destination was an imposing relic of a home, an old mansion swallowed by a hilly, dense forest. I hoped it would be a sanctuary, a place where I could maybe, finally, stitch myself back together. Instead, I stumbled into a pocket of absolute darkness. The mansion was straight out of some gothic horror film, towering with a symphony of creaks accompanying every step, and encircled by a suffocating ring of dark, heavy trees. Miss Finch was the mistress of this strange domain, acting as both foster mother and teacher. 10 other children resided there, but they were off, distant. They moved with a chilling, robotic lack of spirit and consumed candy not as a treat, but as a lifeline. Bowls upon bowls of it for every single meal and snack. Miss Finch had a few hired hands, but one of them, a man named Stanley, stood out like a festering wound. He was a repulsive-looking man, perhaps 50, and he had no business being anywhere near children. He never afforded us the basic respect of knocking before barging into our rooms. Worse, he possessed an unsettling habit of watching us while we ate, his eyes lingering for an uncomfortably long time. I couldn't articulate the feeling, but a deep, primal wrongness radiated from every interaction he had with us. He'd materialize in the hallways, giving us a fright, and seemed to possess an impossible knowledge of our private activities. The other children, glazed over and obsessed with their damnable candies, either didn't notice or simply didn't care. One night, I woke to a sound that chilled me to the bone. Muffled crying. I slid silently from my bed, following the choked sobs to Eliza's room. She was one of the quieter girls, a shadow in the halls. Peeking through the slight gap in her door, my blood ran cold. Stanley stood over her, his bulk menacing in the dim light, whispering something I couldn't quite catch. Eliza was trembling, tears streaming down her small face. "No, please, not that again," she pleaded, her voice a terrified whimper. "I don't want to do this." Stanley's reply was a low, chilling hiss. "If you don't do what I say, you'll never get the magic candies again." Eliza's sobs intensified. But after a moment, she nodded, defeated and clearly petrified. A profound, bone-deep certainty settled over me. Something truly terrible was happening here. The next day, I became Stanley's shadow, watching his every move, desperate to uncover his game. The puzzle pieces fell into place with sickening speed. I noticed the worshipful quality of the children's dependence on the candy, their willingness to do absurd, demeaning tasks for it, like cleaning Stanley's shoes or giving him back rubs. That evening, I trailed Stanley to the pantry, the candy's secure vault. I waited until he was gone, then slipped inside. And there it was, tucked behind the jars of brightly colored sweets. I found a cache of pills. The horrifying truth slammed into me. Stanley wasn't just giving us candy, he was drugging us. He was creating an addiction, a physical and psychological dependency on the sweets, which he then used as his ultimate leverage. When the craving became unbearable, he would force the children to perform disgusting things for him. Stanley was a predator. And the worst realization? Miss Finch knew. She was a coward, too terrified to act, and was silently enabling the abuse. A cocktail of fury, terror, and unwavering resolve surged through me. I was going to stop him. That night I gathered the other kids. At first, they were confused, their eyes dull and clouded by the sweet, toxic haze of the drug. Then, I revealed the pills and laid bare the full, sickening truth of what Stanley had been doing to us. Slowly, agonizingly, comprehension dawned in their eyes, and the fear they felt quickly morphed into righteous rage. When Stanley walked into the room, he didn't stand a chance. We descended on him. We hit him. We kicked him. We were a swarm of terrified, betrayed children fighting for their dignity. He screamed, but we didn't stop until Miss Finch burst in, utterly horrified by the scene. For the first time since my arrival, she did the only right thing. She called the police. Stanley was arrested that night. The terrible mansion was shut down shortly after. We were all taken to a hospital, where we spent 6 long months getting clean, undergoing therapy, and beginning the hard, slow process of forgetting the nightmares we'd endured. It was a struggle. Some of us took longer to heal than others, but we all made it out. I am an adult now. I have moved on, or at least I try to live a life separate from that horror. But every year, on my birthday, the memory resurfaces, accompanied by cards and gifts from the kids who were trapped with me in that mansion. They are my friends, the family I found in the deepest dark. I saved their lives, and in a profound, fundamental way, they saved mine. Life continues, yet those memories are woven into the fabric of who I am. Every piece of candy is a stark, bitter reminder of the old mansion in the hills, and every card I receive is proof that we survived. We made it out together, and that is what ultimately matters. I was just 10 when I first arrived at the Reed's house. I thought I'd finally found a real family. The house was perfect, like something out of a magazine. White picket fence, flowers lining the walkway, and a porch swing. Mrs. Reed was always smiling, and Mr. Reed was the kind of man who patted your head when you did well in school. I had heard that they had helped 4 kids before me, including Luna, with whom I had briefly shared a home with earlier. I was finally safe. We'd have family dinners every night with Mr. Reed carving the roast while Mrs. Reed asked me about school. They even gave me my own room. It was more than I'd ever had before. But then the strange woman started coming. It was always the same. The doorbell would ring and Mrs. Reed's smile would tighten just a little. They never let me see her, not at first. They'd shut the door behind them, and all I'd hear was their muffled voices. The first time I saw her was by accident. I'd forgotten my math book downstairs and had snuck out of bed to get it. I peeked around the corner just in time to see her being led to a small broom cupboard under the stairs. She was Chinese, maybe in her late 30s, with long black hair. But weirdly, the Reeds locked the cupboard from outside. "Why is that woman locked up in the room?" Mrs. Reed's smile was back in place by the time she answered. "She's just a friend who needs some cleaning supplies. Don't worry, honey, go back to your room." I didn't believe her. Something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. The visits became more frequent. Every few days, the woman would show up, and each time the Reeds would lock her away in the cupboard for a few hours. It wasn't just that, though. I started noticing other things. Little things that didn't add up. Mr. Reed would disappear late at night, only to return with dirt on his shoes and clothes. Mrs. Reed would get phone calls, and after hanging up, she'd look worried. One night I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. "She's getting suspicious. We can't keep this up much longer. She's just a child. She doesn't understand. It's too late to back out now. We need to see it through." I didn't know what they were talking about, but I knew it wasn't good. Then, one night, I found the pictures. I went to Mr. Reed's home office to get a stapler for my school project when I knocked over a stack of papers on his desk. As I picked them up, a few photos slid out from underneath. They were of children, boys and girls around my age or younger. Some of them were tied up. My hands shook as I shoved the photos back into the pile, but not before I saw the last one. It was of a Chinese woman sitting in the same broom cupboard that they always locked her in. Only this time she wasn't alone. There was a little girl with her, and I recognized her instantly. Luna. I knew then that something was terribly off. The next day, Mrs. Reed told me to go clean the broom cupboard. I didn't think anything of it until I stepped inside and the door slammed shut behind me. I heard the lock click and I was plunged into darkness. "Let me out, please!" But no one came. I don't know how long I was in there, but it must have been 2 to 3 days. I screamed until my throat was raw, but they didn't care. They would just give me food and water once in a day and kept a bucket beside me for me to relieve. And then one night the door opened. To my horror, it was the same mysterious Chinese woman. She didn't say a word, pulled out a marker, and wrote something in Chinese on my arms and neck before leaving. I had to think fast. There was nothing in the cupboard except for brooms, a mop, and a small toolbox. The toolbox. It took few hours to pry the nails out of the wooden panels, but it loosened the lock on the door, which finally gave way. I crawled out covered in sweat and dirt, and then ran for the neighbor's house. When they opened their door, I burst into tears and told them everything. The police came soon after, and over the next month a massive crackdown happened as the arrest of the Reeds revealed a big human trafficking ring. They found the pictures, imprisoned the Chinese woman and her friend, and this scandal suddenly shook our small town. The Reeds were arrested, but I still see their faces in my nightmares. I considered them close to my parents, not realizing that I was being groomed by them to be sold off. It's often the people with the warmest of smiles who have the darkest of hearts. When Sam and I, Lena, were sent to live with Madame Vesper, we were told it was a fresh chance to be part of a family again, to have a home in the countryside where the air was clean and the nights were quiet. I wanted to believe that, but the moment we arrived, something felt wrong. Madame Vesper's house was old, leaning under the weight of decades, surrounded by thick woods. The air inside was stale and marred with creaking floorboards. Madame Vesper greeted us with a strange smile. She was supposed to be old, with silver hair pinned into a tight bun and wrinkly arms, but her face looked young and radiant, as if she were 30. There were 3 other children there, which was odd since we were not told about them. They were quiet, their eyes downcast, moving like they were half asleep. "Sam, do you think they're okay?" "They're just shy, Lena. We'll be fine." But as the days passed, I wasn't so sure. The house itself seemed alive, with doors that creaked open on their own and shadows that slithered across the walls. At night, I'd hear strange noises coming from the attic, scratching like something was trying to claw its way out. The other children never talked about it, never even seemed to notice. But when I pressed one of the boys, Owen, about it, he just told me to not talk about it, or the caregiver would know. "I'm sure she can't hear us." That is when Owen's face paled, and he turned away, saying that the caregiver was not Madame Vesper. It was the first time I heard about the caretaker, but it wouldn't be the last. The other kids whispered about it when they thought no one was listening, but I caught fragments of their conversations. They believed the caretaker lived in the attic, that it controlled Madame Vesper, that it was the reason for all the strange things that happened there. Every night, Madame Vesper performed strange rituals. She'd light candles, dozens of them, and arrange them in a circle in the living room. She'd chant in a language I didn't understand, her voice rising and falling like the wind through the trees. The first time I saw it, I was frozen. Her rituals grew more bizarre, her voice was more frantic. I rushed back, scared, but I noticed that the other children were suddenly getting weaker. They were pale, their eyes sunken, and they moved even slower than before. It was as if the life was being drained out of them. One day I found an old photograph. It was of Madame Vesper standing in front of the house, but something was off. The photo was dated 1952, but Madame Vesper looked exactly the same. No wrinkles, no signs of aging. her skin still exactly the same. My heart raced as I realized that something strange was afoot. I looped in Sam, and that night we planned to see the attic. The candles were already lit, and Madame Vesper was in the middle of one of her rituals. Her chanting was louder, more frantic, and the house seemed to pulse with a dark energy. The shadows on the walls twisted and writhed almost as if they were alive. We waited until Madame Vesper was deep in a ritual, and then we snuck up. The attic door was locked, but we could hear something moving behind it. Sam was a god at breaking locks, and I gave him my hairpins. "Sam, hurry! We need to do this before she notices." "I'm trying, Lena. Just keep watch." And then it came undone. We went inside amidst the darkness and the strange smell. Sam had brought a match, and as soon as he lit it, we saw a figure in the sparks. It wasn't human or an animal. It was easily over 10 feet tall and had red eyes. Before we could even get out of the jolt, I realized that the smell was of gasoline. And before I could stop Sam, he threw the almost burnt-out stick on the floor to pull out a new one. That was it. A terrifying blaze swept through the attic, and in the middle, we saw the demonic figure wail. We turned to run, but Madame Vesper was already there, her eyes pitch black, and her mouth twisted into a snarl. "You think you can escape? You're mine!" Sam pushed me towards the stairs while he charged at her. "Run, Lena, I'll hold her off." I resisted, but Sam pushed me down the stairs. I looked back just in time to see the black entity and Madame Vesper merged into one. Suddenly, huge claws grew out of her fingers as the fire surrounded her. The fire roared, consuming the attic, but it was too late. I ran to the other kids for help, but as I approached them, I stood in shock. They all had entirely pitch-black eyes as well. And then it made sense why no one had told us about those kids earlier. They were all dead. As the fire took over the house and I heard Sam's screams, I cried and ran out for help. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest house. The neighbors called the cops, but by the time they got there, the house was nothing but ashes. They found the bodies of the other children buried in the ground behind the house, their eyes missing. But they never found Sam or Madame Vesper. It was as if they'd vanished into thin air. Everyone was afraid of believing in me till the bodies were found, but they had no explanations. I still remember it clearly, even after a decade, about what I saw that night. I just pray that Sam found his peace.